we're on episode 80. If you're not on YouTube, congratulations. I'm almost there. I'm getting there. You can go to PATRIOT'S.com, go to the Big Tech tab under shows, and you're going to find the notes here under read, watch, think for yourself. It's important that you stick around for the next few weeks. We are going to be going through early forms of brain manipulation, brain and body manipulation. And the research that's widely available is from Soviet Union, Russia, etc. And we're going to look at Soviet and Czech parapsychology research next. And we will get into controlled offensive behavior soon. The reason I'm asking that you stay tuned for the next few weeks is because this is all foundational knowledge before we start looking at antennas, before we start looking at 5G, before we start looking at the subcomponents of your cell phone and start trying to put these pieces together in order to illustrate just how close this kind of technology is to you, potentially. So before we get rolling with the Soviet Czech parapsychology, I want to show you a couple patents here that I've come across that we're going to go over in detail, but I want to lay them out early here, or at least present them early. So I know some of you end up peeling off about an hour into the show, and that's usually when things start kind of moving. So I'm going to go in reverse order here. So we've watched this new brain-computer interface technology with Steve Hoffman. If you haven't seen this, you can find it, obviously searching YouTube, brain-computer interface, Steve Hoffman. You can go to humaninternet.org and go to the video section, and you'll find it there along with some other interesting videos. That kind of the overarching idea there would be transhumanism. And what I want to show you is a few of these patents now, just that they exist. And then we'll get into some of the earlier works here. A system and a method for instructing a behavior change in a user, right? Collecting bioelectrical signal, and based upon the first and second signals that are collected, you're able to induce change by either providing direct stimulation through electrodes or through some other form of stimulation. It could be audio, it could be visual, or something else. But these are real tangible sciences, real tangible products that have been marketed for things like reducing stress, improving sleep, all of that stuff in a gentle, non-threatening kind of way. So you can imagine for a moment what these kinds of technologies could be done or could be used if they were used in let's say not so gentle, not so benevolent ways. What we see in patents are just a sliver, in my view, of what the real impact of these kinds of technologies are. Here's another one. This is from Saudi Arabia. System, computer, and a medium for harvesting energy from a human, harvesting human energy in the workplace, right? So you can harvest brain energy, or you can harvest kinetic energy, where they put their workers. This is Saudi Arabian oil company. You can put your workers on treadmills. You can tie them up to EEG machines, and you can start harvesting their energy. These are very real things. And if you look in this one, it says right here, the neural energy having been harvested by a neural energy system that includes one or more neural energy harvesting devices, the harvested neural energy generated by neural activity of the employee, as well as kinetic energy, which is literally like walking on a treadmill and generating power, generating some type of usable energy. And we may go over this one. This is, it's important, and there's some interesting pieces in here, but this is a particularly dry patent. And here's another one, a method and an apparatus for changing a brainwave frequency. Neurotrain, this is back in 1990. The patent looks like it's expired, so it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that they didn't pay their fees or enough time has elapsed where it's considered open information. A method for changing brainwave frequency to a desired frequency, right? Determine your current brainwave frequency of a user and generate frequencies with different different brainwave frequencies, right? So you have what you're measuring, and then you have what you want the brain to be doing. So you introduce a frequency series that has specific characteristics that when they're applied to the existing brainwaves that you're measuring, it actually changes it to what you want it to look like. So there's actually three things going on there: what you have, what you want to see, and what you're going to apply to the brain, being the third piece, to get what you want to see out of the brain. And so it talks about using different frequencies. You can do this with light. You can do this with sound. You can do this with electromagnetic energy. You can do this with electrodes on the brain, or excuse me, on the outside of the head. And right here, you can see that this looks like there's an antenna or an amplifier, and they have audio, sound here, binaural beats. Yeah, this is one that deals with sound and or light. You see goggles on this guy's face, and it looks like there's some type of an amplifier to read what's going on with the head and the brain. So there's many ways to do this. There's many ways to entrain the brain and move the brain in directions that you want it to go. Here's another one, and then we'll get moving through this document. It's a 70-page document. Method and apparatus for magnetic brainwave stimulation. Streamlined magnetic brainwave stimulation apparatus receives electronic signals based upon pre-recorded brainwave patterns. The brainwave patterns actuate electromagnets placed on the user's neck adjacent to the user's brainstem to create a plurality of magnetic pulses to influence the user's brain centers to influence a desired mental state. Rhythmic electrical brainwave signals are recorded, identified, divided, and repeated to create a streamlined brainwave signal to induce a desired mental state. The streamlined patterns are then recorded on a suitable memory means, which is anything, right? We all know what memory is at this point. Stuff stored on your phone, stuff stored in the cloud, CD, DVD, USB stick, whatever. When the memory means is actuated, meaning manipulated or changed, the rhythmic electrical signals are sent to magnets located nearby the back of the user's neck, right? Near or adjacent to the user's superior cervical region, which is the upper part of the spine, right? Between the head and the shoulder blades. The area is immediately inferior to the cranial cavity, which is just beneath the cranial cavity, to electromagnetically stimulate the brainstem to influence a desired mental state. This produces a gentle magnetic stimulation, which is neither felt nor discerned by the user. So this is subliminal. It's not felt or discerned. It just kind of happens in the background. The gentle magnetic stimulation passes through the brainstem to the brain centers to influence the desired mental state. And the way this works, the magnetic fields interact with the electrical components of your nervous system. And those are the ion channels and the negatively charged neurons, neural cells that are in your spinal cord, your peripheral nervous system, and your brain. And when a magnetic field in a known repeatable way is passed through those types of cells, they actually create an electrical change, and they can begin to modulate and alter the electrical activity that your body uses for all of the communications that occur inside your body. And this is just one patent that does this kind of stuff. And what you can see here is that this is actually some type of a device that's worn. And this is similar to vagus nerve stimulation. It's in the same general place, but it impacts the body in a different way. This is actually generating magnetic fields. And it's kind of an important thing to keep in mind, because when we start looking through things like parapsychology research and psychotronic research, and when we start getting into Air Force research laboratories, research done on non-ionizing radiation, electromagnetic radiation, its effects on the human organism, and Russian research as it relates to non-ionizing radiation and its effect on the human organism or on biological life. It's magnetic fields are going to come up quite a bit. Electric fields are going to come up quite a bit. And so when I do my research and I find things like this, patents like this that discuss the use of magnetic fields or electric fields to manipulate the brain, It's really just a piece. And the missing link here, the smoking gun, if you will, is whatever technologies convert what's learned from these fundamentals, right? Where you have a device that's close, nearby, attached to the body that's generating something like an electric field or magnetic field, and translating that to how this can be done at distance, a phone that's a foot away from you on a table or 30 feet away from you on the kitchen counter while you're sitting on your couch, or a cell tower that's a mile away from you, or when 5G comes out, 800 feet. How can electric fields and magnetic fields be applied to a human organism in a known, repeatable way that induce some type of a physiological change? And I'm submitting to you that the systems that are coming online, that already are online now, but the ones that are coming online, these systems that are coming online, are more advanced, they're more dynamic, and there's going to be more hardware, which means they're going to have a greater number of tools, if you will, to reach out and interact with the general population. So the goal here over the next number of months is to illustrate as well as I can the over 100 years timeline as it relates to the research endeavors regarding how directed energy, some type of foreign applied energy to an organism, even a human, can influence or interact with the human, directed energy systems. So there's this idea of directed energy where you think, oh, it's a laser gun, or oh, it's something that's going to, it's got to be on an airplane or a satellite or something, and it's going to, when it's used, it's going to create some kind of damage that looks like a bullet hole or a bomb, and it's not. It's not all it does. Directed energy, when done in a medical setting, is very, very subtle. It doesn't necessarily create, in every case, it doesn't necessarily create damage. It just induces an alteration. It induces a modification. And so it's these ideas are complex enough whereby this can't be done in 5 minutes. It can't be done in 2 hours. It just can't. There's no way to illustrate in a 2-hour video clearly enough compelling information to show that this is possible. And so we're on episode 80, and I'm going to submit to you that 60 of those of the episodes that we've done here on Big Tech have laid some of the foundation for where we're about to go in the next few months. And so when we're going to circle back to these ideas, especially the genetic manipulation, because that piece, in my view, is the next stage. We're already entering that next stage with the open air release of biological weapons and this idea of vaccinations becoming mandatory or necessary as a result of the new battle space that is biological warfare. So it all ties together. These are large, giant, overarching ideas that are so fantastical, they ultimately look unbelievable and like science fiction. And we're there. We're there. Is it so hard to believe that humans possess this kind of technology? And in my opinion, the answer is no. We're here. So we're going to start more or less at the beginning. And this really dates back to the early 1900s up to and through 2000s, before this stuff really went underground. And what I mean by underground is it kind of more or less went mainstream, where they started selling it to the public as this type of research needs to be publicly funded, and it needs to be done to do things like correct epilepsy and Alzheimer's and mental health disorders and things of that nature, where they really started diving into complex methods of correcting some serious diseases, but through the research that's ultimately funded, in my view, with taxpayer dollars as well as philanthropic endeavors. The what's learned from this type of research can basically be weaponized. In addition to that, it can be used to radically enhance human learning, human cognition, the way we communicate, all of it. And it's just a matter of how are we going to use these technologies as we go forward? Are we going to use them to uplift and evolve humanity, or are we going to use them to enslave humanity? But before we can make those decisions, we kind of have to know what it is we're dealing with. And in order to do that, we have to start at the beginning. So we're gonna take the next few months and really slow down and go through this piece by piece by piece by piece. So Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology research. This was a Defense Intelligence Agency document that came out in 1975, April 15, 1975. And it was released under the Freedom of Information Act in 2003. You can find this on the CIA library, their FOIA library. And the beginning of this is a little dry, and then it really gets into some interesting things. So table of contents, right? Extrasensory perception, this idea of being able to take in stimuli outside of your five senses, outside of being able to see, touch, taste, hear, smell, right? What else, what other information can the body and or the brain understand and pick up? And it's this idea of extrasensory perception, that sixth sense, that psychic sense being one example. Telepathy in animals, telepathy in man, different experiments to try to understand and or prove it exists, because this is research that's going back into the 20s and the 30s, right? We've got telepathic behavior modification, basic research and applied research. You have different type of psychotronic generators that they were looking at, psychokinesis, out-of-body phenomena, remote viewing. So it's detailed. So I like I said, I really hope you stay tuned and absorb this stuff, because none of this was shared with the public, and none of this came out, or very, very little amount of it came out during the church committee hearings. And so I'm assuming all of the closed door sessions were probably related to this kind of stuff. And I'm assuming that, because when you look at the modern infrastructure that we've constructed, we've created, it is a wireless network that is basically an intelligent wireless network that connects every quote unquote smart device today. And most of these quote unquote smart devices have highly advanced nanotechnology, nanotube based screens, LED screens that can be modulated independently. Each pixel can be independently modulated. You've got sophisticated speakers. You've got sophisticated microphones. You have very, very high definition cameras. You have infrared transmitting devices that are incorporated in these things for what we understand as facial recognition and depth perception. And you have multiple antennas. And that's all just in a cell phone, low power. That's not including cellular networks, digital television broadcast towers, AM, FM radio broadcast towers, Gwen towers, which are for weather forecasting, as well as whatever they've got up on satellites, which from what we're seeing can be scaled up to incredibly lethal degrees of power, whereby they can do things like start fires or put holes in military equipment. So there's a large range or a large scale as it relates to the application of energy. And it doesn't stop with lasers or microwaves. Lasers being in the light spectrum, microwaves being in the radio spectrum. It doesn't stop there. You have acoustic waves, and then you have electromagnetic waves, which are both light and millimeter wave, microwave, X-ray, all of those. So we're going to look at these things slowly, but when we're done, I really hope you have a clear, definitive understanding of just what it is that's around you when you carry around something like a cell phone. It is a sensor platform, but it is also an offensive system. It is an offensive system. And when we start looking at the amounts of power and or the types of modulation schemes that are necessary to do this type of manipulation, you'll start to see that it's very possible. It's very possible. All right, so this is 1975, and this is when it was released. So we're going to read the summary, and we're going to browse through this. During the past 25 years, Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychologists have reported that paranormal phenomena such as extrasensory perception, telepathy, and psychokinesis have been demonstrated under rigorously controlled laboratory conditions. Skeptics in both nations have attacked the study of such phenomena on both scientific and political ideological grounds. Criticism based on political ideology has stemmed from the fact that much past research has been non-materialistic in the sense that results have not been reported in terms of contemporary conventional science. Thus, the critics feel that parapsychology has fostered continued belief in mysticism, occultism, and religion. In order to refute the skeptics' contentions that psychic phenomena do not fit accepted scientific and political thought, Soviet and Czech scientists now argue that there are many well-established facts which remain as anomalous to scientific paradigms as extrasensory perception. ESP refers to the information which is not received via the usual senses, and as a general term include telepathy, the Soviet, quote, biocommunication, end quote, and psychokinesis, or the Soviet bioenergetics. Communist parapsychologists argue that after decades of research, conventional science still has no satisfactory neurophysiological explanation of memory, nor is there any appropriate model for explaining how raw data impinging on man's senses are transformed into a conscious experience. They also point to the dematerialized character of contemporary physics. A science filled with such bizarre components as advanced potential, waves of electrons perceived before they are generated, tunneling effects, electrons penetrating barriers, which by the laws of probability should be impenetrable, and tachyons, particles traveling faster than light, and thus implying the possibility of a backward flow of time. In short, they conclude that hard science no longer offers secure rationale for the denial of the possibility of a non-causal event. Now, that sounds really, really crazy complicated, but what they're really digging at here is this is when when science, in my opinion, is really trying to understand a clear distinction between quantum science, quantum mechanics, and conventional or classical science. And classical science is evolving as the sensors and as the general knowledge base improves. What was considered common knowledge in the classical science domain is also being turned upside down. So as the classical sciences are being re-established or reimagined, if you will, at the same time, you're having quantum mechanics and quantum science coming online, being understood as a standard set or a standard known, measurable series of principles. So there was a lot of synergy and a lot of turmoil that occurred during this period of time, and that's what I get out of reading this paragraph. Is they're with the technology of the time, and this is 50 or 60 years ago, maybe even longer. The measurement tools get better, the observations get better, and so these new ideas or these new phenomenon are beginning to be understood. That's completely rewriting the understanding of what is possible in our domain, right? The universe as we understand it. And this page is intentionally left blank. Extrasensory perception. Parapsychology is a field involving research on the informational and energetic possibilities of the psychic and biophysical activities of living organisms. Parapsychology investigates the complex of phenomena related to the interaction of living organisms with each other and with surrounding environment without the mediation of the known sense organs or of presently identified energy transfer mechanisms. Western parapsychologists refer to this complex of phenomena as extrasensory perception, the PSI phenomena. The Soviets prefer the term biocommunications instead of parapsychology, PSI phenomena, or ESP. Other Soviet terms which are equivalent to the term parapsychology include psychophysiology, psychotronics, psychoenergetics, or biophysical effects. The Soviet term biocommunications can be further subdivided into two general classifications: bioinformation and bioenergetics. Bioinformation includes paranormal events between living organisms, telepathy, precognition. those types of things, and events between living organisms and the inanimate world. Bioenergetics denotes activities such as biological locator and indicator techniques, bioenergetic therapy using electromagnetic fields, and psychokinesis, or the influence of bioenergy on matter. Definitions of the terms biocommunication, bioinformation, and bioenergetics are as follows. Biocommunications, a branch of science involved with the human capability of obtaining information from other than the normal senses and the ability to respond to or reasonably interpret such information. Biocommunications, also synonymous with parapsychology, is, however, distinct from other sciences in that it is primarily concerned with determining the nature of a definite group of natural phenomenon controlled by laws which are not based on any presently known energetic influence. So bear in mind the time frame in which this was written. Those phenomena associated with the obtaining of information through means other than the normal sensory channels, example, through extrasensory perception, there are several forms of ESP, including telepathy. Transmission or reading of thoughts refers to the extrasensory reception of information about the mental processes of others. Looks like proscopy or precognition is a form of ESP which under certain circumstances involves crossing the barrier of time to obtain information about future events. And it's like paragnosia or clairvoyance refers to the extrasensory perception of information about objective events in the outer world. So this is the attempt at science to demystify mysticism or to demystify psychic type behavior and to try to break down and understand what bioenergy is. And when you look at ancient Chinese medicine, for example, they're into the same kind of stuff, where they can generate energy from their body and use it for healing. They can read the energy of other people, the meridian channels, the acupuncture channels, the biocircuitry, all of that stuff sort of interrelates to what it is that is this biological energy, and then understanding it and then being able to manipulate it, read it, store it, quantify it, transmit it, all of it. So bioenergetics involves phenomena associated with the production of objectively detectable effects through means other than known energetic influences. Seemingly incredible effects have been reported, such as the movement of distinct objects without any detectable use of physical force, psychokinesis or telekinesis. Anti-gravitational effects, transformations of energy, electromagnetic effects arising without adequate physical cause, and chemical reactions and biological processes occurring through mental concentration. A comparison of US and Soviet parapsychology terms is given, it says in figure 1. So the US side, parapsychology, PSI phenomenon, and ESP. And the way the Soviets termed these same ideas are biocommunications, psychophysiology, psychotronics, psychoenergetics, or biophysical effects. Biocommunications, bioinformation, or bioenergetics. Telepathy and precognition is the same as bioinformation. Dowsing or psychokinesis equals bioenergetics. In recent years, Czechoslovakian parapsychologists have begun using the term psychotronics in reference to all aspects of their paranormal phenomena research. They define psychotronics as the study of those borderline phenomena and signs of human existence that have a psychosomatic base, but manifest themselves in such a way that they are more or less exceed from framework of this base. Such phenomena include autosuggestion, hypnosis, telepathy, psychokinesis, and other paranormal effects and phenomena. The Czech term does not encompass the study of stigmata, levitation, etc., since these are considered to be hallucinatory states or processes, and as such, areas of investigation and treatment more appropriate for psychology or psychiatry. In general, however, the Czech science of psychotronics includes the study of all phenomenon presently being investigated by Soviet and Western parapsychologists. So note the distinction here, that they're actually trying to understand the difference between what is considered hallucinatory or manifestations of the mind that aren't necessarily measurable or quantifiable versus the things that are measurable and are quantifiable, which in and of itself implies that there is bioenergy that's floating around, that we generate, that we receive, that we pick up on. What does chemistry mean when you meet somebody? What is that? What is chemistry? What is that? What is the energy that you feel when you're around somebody, or the drag that you feel when you're around somebody? Is there a way to measure that? Current Soviet and Czech parapsychological terms and objectives have evolved in a climate of fluctuating political pressure. Scientists in pre-revolutionary Russia studied parapsychology, as did later Soviet scientists in the 20s and the 30s. In 1924, Lucharsky, Commissar for Education, took the initiative in forming a Soviet Committee for Psychical Research. As a result of academician Bekhtcherev's enthusiasm for the subject, extensive work was financed at the University of Leningrad Institute for Brain Research. Vasiliev, a former student of Bekhtcherev's, demonstrated to his own satisfaction that telepathic influence at a distance may indeed occur. Work flourished throughout the 30s, with research being reported in the literature in 1934, 36, and 37. After 1937, further experiments in the field of parapsychology were forbidden. During Stalin's time, the study of paranormal phenomena was interpreted as a deliberate attempt to undermine the doctrines of materialism. Telepathy was treated as a mystical and antisocial superstition, and nothing further was heard of parapsychology in the Soviet Union until the late 1950s. Then, as a result of French newspaper articles, rumors began to circulate that American researchers had disproved the brain radio theory as a result of ship-to-shore telepathy experiments involving U.S. atomic submarine Nautilus. The Nautilus experiments probably were mythical, but the claims had one tangible consequence. The Soviet authorities permitted Vasiliev, then professor of physiology and holder of the Order of Lenin, to publish his own earlier work in which decades previously he had proven to his own satisfaction that radio-type brainwaves did not mediate telepathy. Vasiliev was also allowed to open a unit for the study of parapsychology at the Institute for Brain Research. His work first reached the West with an English translation of his monograph, Experiments in Mental Suggestion, in 1963. The result was instant international interest. Numerous Western researchers traveled to the Soviet Union and found a fair amount of activity and interest in the paranormal, although the research approaches were frequently different from those in the West. Soviet workers tended to be far more preoccupied with whole body physical and biological effects rather than with the mental phenomena with which Western researchers had long been preoccupied. So what we're looking at here are energy applications to the body and the brain, and the Soviets saying here were occupied or preoccupied with whole body physical and biological effects rather than what the West was preoccupied with, which were the mental phenomena associated with these types of techniques or technologies. Some of the first parapsychologists to visit the Soviet Union after the publication of Vasiliev's work described the difference in atmosphere pervading two conferences in 1963 and 1968. During the first, free and cordial exchange of views was possible. The second was overshadowed by an article in Pravda attacking parapsychology, which largely wrecked the formal plans for the program. Most of the Soviets declined to speak. Western visitors were pressed to deliver impromptu lectures, and the House of Friendship in Moscow withdrew its invitation to hold further meetings or allow films to be shown there. From this time onwards, with certain fluctuations, official hostility towards parapsychology increased in the Soviet Union. For example, Soviet authorities took the strongest possible exception to the bestseller in the West, Ostrander and Schrodinger's psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain. Edward K. Neumov, then director of the Institute of Technical Parapsychology, Moscow, was cited throughout the Journalist's Guide and Mentor. Unfortunately, the Voice of America beamed a radio program into the Soviet Union discussing the Schrodinger and Ostrander book, a broadcast that was construed as a politically motivated attack using parapsychology as a weapon. Apart from this episode, it is not entirely clear why Soviet officialdom should have taken such a fierce exception to a frankly popular, sensational, and rather chaotic book, which was not taken seriously by many Western scientists. The most plausible interpretation seems that the Soviets were worried that they might be believed by the world scientific community to be self-proclaimed champions and leaders of parapsychology. In fact, Soviet scientists are just as divided among themselves concerning parapsychology as scientists elsewhere, and since 1972, a number of openly critical publications concerning parapsychology research have appeared in the Soviet Union. A few examples of such open attacks follow. What I want to convey to you is this. You can read these or look at this idea of having such conflicting, such polarizing opinions about these topics. You can pick one side or the other and have it steer and shape your paradigm, what you believe or want to believe about this whole idea of telepathy, extrasensory perception, bioenergy, this idea of directed energy or focused energy being applied to a human or an animal or even a plant and having it create some measurable change. There are well-cited, well-credited, or well-credentialed people on both sides of the argument. And what I submit to you is this: the fact that there is such polarizing information and that on each side of these issues, there are well-credentialed individuals that have well-published papers indicates that there is enough there to even engage in the debate. And that, folks, is enough for me to consider for a moment that this is possible, plausible, probable, and, in my opinion, actually happening. Why would something be studied? Why would governments throw so much money at these ideas for a century or more if they didn't produce tangible results? Which then begs the question, why not allow both sides to be published so that there is this element of doubt, so that you have created a paradigm with which you can present disinformation? You've created a paradigm which you can selectively apply your influence or your certifications as a governing body, United States, European, Russian, or otherwise, in order to steer and shape narratives independently, meaning in the science field or in the science community versus the entertainment field or the entertainment community versus the general population versus general academia, in order to create this giant fusion or confusion amongst the various institutions, so that there isn't any clearly definitive means to regulate this type of stuff. And there is enough of a gray area, if you will, to continue to do this type of research. So there's multiple sides of this coin, or this equation is probably a better way to maybe phrase that. So we're gonna look at some of the pros and the cons, if you will. And in this case, what we're going to read here are the attacks on this idea of parapsychology, this idea of extrasensory perception. In 1972, Belkner, a reputable Soviet neurophysiologist, published a book titled Parapsychology, Science or Superstition. In an annotation of this book, and in fact, as the lead paragraph, Belkner stated, "This book is designed to debunk parapsychology." The book began with such archaic topics as phrenology, head bump reading, and ended with a chapter prefaced by a cartoon showing a broom sweeping the Russian word parapsychology out of the picture. The entire basis of the book was to make a direct link between 19th century spiritualism and 20th century parapsychology. In 1973, Kazakhstania Pravda carried an article by Doctor of Medical Science Potochin titled "Careful, Paramedicine." In his article, Potochin openly attacked unproven telepathic transmission of information over distances from one person to another on the basis of their neuropsychic states, and criticized parapsychologists for claiming to obtain results that are completely unrelated to cause and effect principle. In October 1973, a long and detailed paper entitled Parapsychology, Fiction or Reality, was published in Questions of Philosophy, an official publication of the Soviet Academy of Pediological Sciences by 4 eminent members of the Moscow Academy of Pediological Sciences. And it lists their names here. They explicitly set out to express the viewpoint of the USSR Society of Psychologists towards parapsychology. Obviously, they wrote, some so-called parapsychological phenomena do happen. However, the main obstacle to the acceptance of their existence is ignorance of the basis of their operation. It is not clear from this paper just which parapsychological phenomenon obviously do happen. The only ones which the authors unambiguously supported as authentic were Kirlian photography, radiation field photography, by means of which the biological energy fields of plants and animals may be visualized. So they're acknowledging that there's a radiation field that can be photographed that emits from a biological organism. It's a biological energy field that emanates from plants, animals, etc., and then it can be visualized and photographed. Furthermore, a dermal optical vision, the alleged ability to see colors through opaque shielding by touch alone. Paradoxically, Kirlian photography is probably based on known forms of energy, while dermal optical vision has no known basis in fact. A large portion of the paper was in fact devoted to the denunciation of militant parapsychologists, popular credulity, fraudulent practices, physicists who quite unnecessarily changed their jobs to investigate paranormal phenomenon, sensationalistic journalists, and institutions such as the Institute for Technical Parapsychology, which was cited by name. Apparently, the objective of the paper was to discredit as myth any idea of parapsychological movement in the Soviet Union, and to ensure that the science of parapsychology should not continue to emerge. To quote the authors, there is no need for parapsychology to exist as a separate discipline. There is additional evidence that the official attitude towards parapsychology in the Soviet Union may have changed. In the 1960s, Moscow parapsychologist Edward Naumov was recognized internationally as the unofficial Soviet spokesman for the science. In March 1974, Naumov was arrested and sentenced to 2 years hard labor. In January 1975, parapsychologist Larissa Vilenskaya, who had previously been permitted to visit Naumov in jail, was herself arrested. The reason for her arrest is not known, but Naumov was apparently convicted of taking fees for his lectures without the permission of appropriate authorities. According to reports from the Soviet Union, the fees seem to have been collected in the normal way by the club's director and his assistant. However, both were subsequently declared psychologically unfit to testify, certified schizophrenic, and referred for some unspecified form of involuntary treatment at the Serbsky Institute for Forensic Psychological Expertise. The institute's director, Andrzej Snetsky, was widely known for his psychiatric zeal on behalf of ideological orthodoxy and for his opposition to parapsychology. At the trial, Snitsky himself gave evidence to the effect that parapsychology was a pseudoscience based on idealism and mysticism. Although 40 witnesses said they had bought their tickets from the club's director or his representative, Naumov was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years in a camp. According to Lev Regelson, a Moscow physicist, Naumov's offense was twofold. First, Despite reiterated warnings from the KGB, he had maintained free, personal human contacts with foreign scholars and made use of the material he received for disseminating information on parapsychology in the USSR. Naumov's second fault is ideological. Up to most recent times, parapsychology has been looked on in the Soviet Union as mysticism and pseudoscience, sharing the fate of the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, cybernetics, and genetics. So it's being classified as pseudoscience, which at the time in the USSR, pseudoscience, other sciences that were classified as pseudoscience were the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, cybernetics, and genetics, all of which are incredibly bona fide ideas and or sciences today. I'm missing what's going on in chat, and I see you guys out there. What I'm reading is earlier documentation. And the reason we're doing this is to sort of, as a group, move up to where we are today. And so what we're reading is going to be controversial. It's going to be inconclusive for a number of reasons. It's a newer field of study. The tools and techniques are rudimentary or archaic relative to the types of sensitive instrumentation and the types of techniques that are used today in this field. And the reason we have more sensitive, more conclusive information today is as a result of all of this rudimentary or initial organic type research. And I say organic kind of, euphemistically. I don't necessarily mean it's organic. Obviously, it's wrought with disinformation and controversial ideologies, as is most science before it has gone through the fire, the tempering fire. To my point, this idea that the USSR 50 or 60 years ago basically was looking at the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, cybernetics, and genetics as pseudoscience or as mysticism, things that don't exist. So take it with a grain of salt and just understand that we're looking at this with a great deal of specificity. So you're going to go, when you're processing this information, I'm hopeful that you go back and forth, whether or not you believe this is real, whether or not you think that what you're hearing or processing is not possible. It is important to critically think about this. It's important to apply your own judgment to what it is that you're absorbing. And this is true with anything in your life, anything that you're choosing to spend your time on. That's what I encourage you to do. Look at it from both sides. And at the end of all of it, you may come to a conclusion that you don't think it's possible. That's just fine. Because anybody that tells you that you have to think of it one way versus another has other motives. And I don't. I want you to learn and understand this as you see fit. It's not up to me. What's going to happen if you process this information is you're going to have your own realizations. You're going to have your own aha moments, your own eureka moments. Later, when you might be thinking about this, or when something else is discussed potentially weeks from now, that you're going to remember something that resonated with you today or last show or next show. And hopefully you'll begin to slowly apply and put these pieces together. Because all of this research and science is the foundation for the future of the way humans are going to communicate on the internet. The phone is going to look like a telegraph machine. You know, the thing that they used to use to, it was just a button and you tap, 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 to tap, 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 to send a message across the country. That's what the phone is going to be as it relates to how we communicate. potentially 20 years from now, maybe sooner, maybe later. And it's this idea of understanding biological communications to such an extent that you can apply energy to a biological organism and have a meaningful effect, to the tune of being able to communicate or to artificially make somebody feel something, an emotion or a sensation. That is what this research is ultimately leading to. And in my view, we're there. And I've shared with you this idea of human bond communication that Huawei is advertising to a European conventional body in London in 2017, where it discusses being able to transmit emotion over the internet. And this idea of being able to quantify all five senses, all five of the traditional senses, to be able to understand them out of a human, digitize them, transmit them over the internet, and apply them to the nervous system of another human. And so what we're reading is like kindergarten version of where we're going to go. We're going to go to the PhD or the master's level, the collegiate level, the university level. When we start looking at magnetic fields, we'll revisit nanotechnology, biologic nanotechnology, meaning genetic information, genetic manipulation, as well as nanomagnetic material, for example, or bioluminescent material, for example, in the nanotech field, to be able to sort of fuse all of this together. But we're going through it all piece by piece. So that's really why we're looking back in time, because it's important to understand where we've been to see where we're going. And again, I encourage you to look at this critically so that you can allow yourself to go back and forth as it relates to what you think it may be possible or not possible. That way, when you're done, you're going to feel comfortable with how you feel about this, and hopefully more confident with applying these strategies with other facets of your life. What I mean by that is thinking critically about something and entertaining an idea regardless of your initial impulse. If your initial impulse to this is to recoil, oh my gosh, right? No way, can't be. Well, I encourage you to work past that simply for the sake of the exercise of considering it. Because if you do that, in my view, throughout your life, you begin to see the other side of things or another side of things, and the filter with which you view and understand the world will change. It doesn't necessarily mean that you change as it relates to how you interact with the world, but it may give you a better or a more general understanding of what it is that is the world. It doesn't necessarily stop with what I'm interested in. I mean, this applies to everything as it relates to critical thought. So we'll continue. Naumov's trial. All right. So this guy, 2 years in prison, and he had the party, if you will, the Central Communist Party, basically assigned the opposing main scientists, the opposing views head scientist, to oversee this guy or to testify against him in court and put Naumov in jail. And then some lady who came and saw Naumov was also put into jail. And they cited him, both of them, basically with being crazy and with sharing information with foreigners, according to the KGB. Right. So Naumov's trial and the dismissal from their posts of others who had been active in parapsychology in the Soviet Union in the 1960s may mark the end of a phase during which free and indeed spirited discussion of parapsychological topics were permitted throughout the Soviet Union, and during which a fair amount of informational and unofficial East-West contact was at least tolerated. Despite apparent shifts in the official attitude towards the science, 49 out of the 91 papers presented in 1973 at the first International Conference on Psychotronic Research in Prague, Czechoslovakia, were authored by Soviet or ECC researchers. In addition, the Moscow publication Journalist published a lengthy editorial in 1974 in which readers were assured that all energy fields existing in nature are not known to contemporary physics, and that because various phenomena cannot as yet be explained does not mean that they do not exist. The name of the science may be changed in the future, but the research will continue. And so this ties into this idea that they understand that something is happening, but you don't have existing scientific proofs to be able to associate it or to make conclusive determinations. And so this is more or less putting the cart before the horse, or where you're measuring the phenomenon to be able to understand and quantify the science. And so the two opposing views are those that are forward-looking, saying, look, we see this, we think we can measure it, we need to understand how to measure it so that we can begin to define it. That's one side. Versus the other side saying, no, based on current available proven science, this doesn't fit the model, therefore it doesn't exist. And there is, in a nutshell, the general paradigm. Those that look only at the past, what's been considered common knowledge of the past, to define the future, versus those that look at the future and try to understand it so they can create new definitions that will be then considered common knowledge. During the past decade, parapsychology has undergone many changes in the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia. In a sense, this is a question of changing generations. The elder generation of researchers who actively investigated the problems of psychotronics regarded it predominantly as philosophy and psychology. To a certain extent, this concept determined their approach to problems. In most cases, they conclude that very complex psychic processes were involved, processes that were difficult to control, hence were not always reproducible. This older generation of researchers had as a primary objective the proof of psychic processes. Man, I just lost my thought, my spot. Here we go. This older generation of researchers had their primary objective the proof of psychic processes and the defense of their theories. They confined themselves to their own specifics and problems. In terms of the quantity of accumulated facts and performed experiments, their work was considerable and often awe-inspiring. Researchers of the younger generation in the USSR and Czechoslovakia are beginning to regard this concept as one-sided, a straitjacket. They are not satisfied with the constant proving and description of the phenomenon. They also want to model, amplify, formulate, and compute. A desire to conclusively master the problems has compelled them to abandon the previous concept and to define parapsychology for the time being as a borderline interdisciplinary science. To the unipolar philosophical psychological concept, there is now added another pole, the technical physical concept. Between these two poles, there is sufficient room for parapsychology to comprehend all the phenomena that it investigates in their complexity. So what you have is the old and the new. And the new basically saying, the younger science people basically saying, we need to figure out how to use tools to start to quantify this research. And so their focus turned from looking at the mystic side and finding the psychics and finding the abnormal phenomenon that are existing naturally and then studying those things, to looking at technical, physical, or instrumentation to begin to measure these things. And so what they're saying here is that those are two independent fields of study in the larger overarching idea of parapsychology, or psychotronics, or extrasensory perception, right? And if those two can be considered, you have now created a larger, broader way in which you can define this idea of parapsychology. Present-day Soviet parapsychologists are recruited from practically all scientific disciplines, not as individual enthusiasts, but as members of coordinated interdisciplinary teams of specialists. This kind of sounds like a DARPA model to me. And this was back, 50, 60 years ago, kind of like when DARPA was founded. In 1967, the Czechs established the Coordination Group for Psychotronic, the Parapsychological Research. They intentionally set one of their principal objectives, the description of the undetermined properties of the energy bound to man and to animate nature, meaning things that are alive, plants and animals and man, right? So this Coordination Group for Psychotronic Research, right, set as one of their primary or principal objectives is to describe the undetermined properties of the energy bound to biologic life, the energy that is associated with man, plant, and animal. They appear to be convinced, for example, that de Broglie's dual concept, in which the electron may appear as a mass of inertia or as electromagnetic radiation, requires a third aspect, the vehicle of which would not necessarily be de Broglie's electron, but possibly a mental ion or a mention, presupposed by Professor F. Kuada. A mental ion. Well, that's real interesting because they found now that ions in the brain and the nervous system are what regulate the electrical activity in the brain. So they were onto something. They just called it something different. They're looking at it as a mental ion, trying to understand what's generating the electric fields out of biologic life. And they're calling it a mental ion. And what we understand that today is as ion channels. And we've gone over those in some detail. We will go over ion channels again and again and again because they have everything to do with interacting with the nervous system and the brain. So we have the mental ion, right? And that only will it be possible to completely express the animated and inanimate world of matter in motion. By defining the parameters of the undefined form of energy, the concept of matter in motion could gain a third aspect, and matter in motion would be defined by laws far more complex and comprehensive than are present. It is interesting to note the increasing validity of Professor Vassilev's statement that discovery of the laws of the as yet known form of energy bound to man will be of no less significance than the discovery of atomic energy. So what he's getting at, Vassilev, he knew very well that what he was measuring is currently undefined by standard science. And what he's saying is that the discovery of the laws, right, scientific laws that are still unknown at the time he was writing this or making this statement are going to be equivalent to those discoveries of the laws related to atomic energy. And what he's referring to, these energy forms that are bound to man, bioenergy. Therefore, it is no coincidence that theoretical physicists and plasma physicists in the Federal Republic of Germany believe that understanding of the physical interactions of the psychical physical interactions of living organisms will add something basically new to physics and biology. So I'm going to recap this statement here as well, right? Federal Republic of Germany believed that understanding psychical physical interactions, right? And this group, the First Republic of Germany, this group of people, theoretical physicists and plasma physicists, that are trying to understand and quantify the psychical physical interactions of living organisms. Now, when I read this statement, I think the Department of Energy, plasma physics, you have this whole quantum revolution that's being deployed through the Department of Energy, as well as, very well regarded institutions, colleges, academia. But they already know back then, right? In the 60s, 70s, maybe even as earlier than that there is a link between understanding physics, plasma physics, and atomic theory, if you will, down at that scale. So we're looking at quantum mechanics, quantum energy, and this idea of being able to measure and quantify psychic energy, bioenergy. The Czechs believe that as soon as science begins to understand the properties of this new form of energy, questions of its mastery and utilization will rise to the forefront. Robert Pavlita's work, which is discussed in detail in part 2, is no small contribution in this direction, whereas the past parapsychology operated predominantly by the method of exceptional individual performance. Psychotronics presuppose a new model, the living organism or man, processing of energy and performance. In 1982, a century will have elapsed since the foundation in England of the first Society of Psychical Research. 100 years was the demarcation mark, right? 1982 was a demarcation of 100 years of this kind of understanding or research into psychic energy, psychical research. And this is in England, the first Society for Psychical Research. 100-year mark for that first institution was in 1982. Zdeněk Rejak, internationally renowned parapsychologist of Czechoslovak Scientific and Technical Society, section for psychotronic research, has stated, "We are convinced that psychotronics will mark this centennial with significant results in practical, applied, and basic research, in the knowledge that it will become an essential new anthropological science, one that will enhance primarily man's integrity." That's remarkable. It's remarkable. Telepathy, energy transfer in animals. Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychologists have not reported telepathy in animals in recent years. Instead, they have emphasized research on biological energy transfer. Soviet parapsychology research is a multidisciplinary and indistinguishable from conventional Soviet physiological research. Both disciplines are presently involved in attempts to identify the source of internally generated and externally imposed stimuli underlying physiological processes. Soviet research on telepathy in animals in the 1920s and 1930s was devoted largely to proving that telepathy between man and animals did indeed exist. A good example of the early Soviet approach was research conducted by Bekhterev of Leningrad University in collaboration with the circus performer Durov. Hang on one sec. Bekhterev reported that Durov's trained dogs successfully solved arithmetic problems and identified or retrieved objects solely on the basis of their trainer's mental suggestion. The results of these tests were controversial since the dogs' performances were good when Durov was present and supplied the suggestions, but deteriorated markedly when he was absent and other individuals attempted to mentally control them. Bekterev's original objective was to demonstrate that telepathy between man and animals was mediated by some form of electromagnetic radiation. But by 1937, he and other Soviet parapsychologists had concluded that no known form of electromagnetic radiation was the carrier of thought transmission. The EMR theory of information transfer is still unresolved by the Soviets, but is still the major basis underlying much of their research. In 1962, Kaczynski's advanced the theory that animals are capable of visual and oral perception and reflex understanding of the behavior of other animals or humans. He postulated that this ability resulted from the capacity of one animal to detect, via its own nervous system, analyze and synthesize signal stimuli given off by another animal. According to Kaczynski, the signals are transmitted in the form of a bioradiational sight ray and analyzed by the percipient animal as a result of its Pavlovian conditioning. The term bioradiational rays is still used by some Soviet and Czech parapsychologists to refer to focusing and concentration of biological energy by the brain and the optical neural channels. Present-day Soviet and Czech parapsychology research with animals is devoted almost exclusively to investigation of sources of biological energy involved in physiological processes, the interactions of such energy with external fields, and the effects of externally generated fields on animal physiology. Reference to telepathy in the sense of communications by transmission of total conceptual mental formulations is seldom made. A significant advance toward identification of EMR, electromagnetic radiation source, of biological energy transfer was gained from recent research conducted at the University of Novosibirsk. Scientists there investigated the release of energy during cell division and during cellular damage and repair resulting from viral infection or toxic chemicals. So they are measuring energy during cellular processes, cell division, cellular damage, and repair events resulting from infection or from toxicity. In over 5,000 experiments with cell cultures and animal organs, it was shown that damaged cells radiated some form of energy, and that the energy released was capable of causing damage in adjacent control preparations of organs or cells. Further investigation revealed that a uniform pattern, code, or rhythm of radiation was emitted by normal cells. This pattern was disturbed when cellular damage occurred, becoming quite irregular. It was also found that the patterns were transmitted from experimental to control preparations only when the cells or organs were cultured in quartz containers. Quartz containers. Quartz is a resonator, that is a crystal, folks. Since quartz transmits ultraviolet radiation and standard laboratory glassware does not, the Soviets concluded that UV radiation mediated cellular information transfer. So to give you a visual of what this looks like, you have two Petri dishes side by side, but they are independent of each other. They may be some distance apart. They manipulate the cell cultures in one of the Petri dishes that are made of quartz. And that manipulation is measurable in the Petri dish that has no man-made manipulation. So what they're measuring is this energetic effect that occurs when they manipulate one sample sitting next to another sample in an independent dish. And they're determining that ultraviolet radiation at this point in time, they're determining that ultraviolet radiation is transmitted from the cells, the cultures that they're manipulating, into the other Petri dish that has not been manipulated by the scientists. And that some energy effect is actually transferred. The researchers subsequently correlated given the irregularities of emission with specific diseases and are now attempting to develop techniques for diagnosis and therapy by monitoring and altering cellular radiation codes. Czechoslovakian research on energy transfer between animal muscle preparations from animal to man and from man to man has also demonstrated electromagnetic radiation as a vehicle of biological energy transfer. In experiments conducted between 1948 and 1968 at the Okres Institute of Public Health, Kutna Hora, Czechoslovakia, Dr. Bradna demonstrated contactless, no contact, transfer of stimuli between frog neuromuscular preparations. Bradna placed identical preparations side by side. Stimulation of one preparation with electric pulses at frequencies between 10 and 30 pulses per second caused contraction, and a recorded electromyographic response in the other. And electromyography is just a measurement of muscle activity. That's what that is. In other experiments, stimulation of muscle preparations influenced the oscillations of a pendulum and increased the muscle tension of a human subject. Bradna obtained objective proof that energy in the very high frequency range, that's VHF, that's television and cell phone, folks, range, mediated the stimulus transmission. He also demonstrated that myotransfer could be blocked with ferrous metal filters, ferrous, iron, and aluminum, could be deformed with magnets. Ferrites and other conductors could be reflected and transmitted over waveguides and shielded with grids. Bradna concluded that primary perceptual and informational pathways between animals are based on metabolic processes at the macromolecular level, and that the magnitude of the energy transfer depends on muscular adenosine triphosphate, ATP, energy release. And ATP is a very critical part of how we stay alive. ATP that's what they measure. When they look at cellular processes and cellular energies, they measure ATP. And one of the reasons why not everybody, but a lot of people are sluggish and slow is because ATP is dramatically affected by electromagnetic radiation, as well as biotoxicity, toxins that are in our environment, food, water, air, as well as your emotional state. All of those things play a major role in your body's ability to use ATP, to process ATP, to create ATP. ATP is a huge deal with biology. Anyway, Bradna has reported successful application of myotransfer in physiotherapy. Myotransfer is this idea of being able to excite muscle tissue in one sample and measure the excitation in another sample that's not being excited, right? It has been found to be effective for both individuals and groups. In the latter case, the summation of stimuli has been shown to enhance the neuromuscular response of individuals within the group. Bradna feels that such stimuli influence the herd behavior of animals and may also be a factor in altering human behavior under conditions of isolation or overcrowding. Now, if this doesn't like scream MK Ultra-ish stuff to you, I don't know what does. But this does to me. Where you can stimulate the muscle of somebody or some animal, and they're in a group or next to another animal, and that induces some type of an electrical or energetic change in an animal or a person or a group that's not being directly stimulated. That's kind of a crazy concept, right? So imagine for a moment that you're the Wi-Fi router where you are nearby your family or your coworkers, and you are used as the energy source to then impart some energetic effect on people that you're nearby. So they apply energy to you, and your bioenergy, your natural energy that you emit changes, and that causes a change in someone else's bioenergy field. That's complicated, isn't it? We'll just wait until we get into electromagnetic resonances again and directed energy as it relates to satellites and cell towers and cell phones. So just keep this little piece in mind that they were looking at measurable effects of being able to stimulate muscles, and that generating a change in bioenergy that was then measurable in an adjacent sample that wasn't manipulated. That's kind of creepy. In the Soviet Union, Dr. Koldov has investigated the effects of a constant magnetic field on rabbits. This is another one that we need to remember. Constant magnetic fields, right? Just know that that exists, a constant magnetic field. Whole body exposures to fields between 30 and 2,000 orstods result in non-specific changes in the electroencephalogram. So if you don't know what orstods is, it's a measurement of grams per centimeter. It's amount of a magnetic flux in, I believe, grams per centimeter. And 30 to 2,000 is a very, very small amount. Very small amount of energy. This is a constant magnetic field that the whole body is exposed to. So it's not specific pinpointed laser kind of shit. That's literally just, let me use an antenna and generate a plume, a radiation field, a cloud, a heat map of a constant magnetic field of very low intensity. And let's continue. Koldov showed that weak magnetic as well as other externally generated radiation fields have a direct effect on nerve tissue. And for this reason, he feels that natural and artificial fields in man's environment may have an influence on health and behavior via the nervous system and the hypothalamus, which is part of your brain. It's the deep center in your brain. I believe it's associated with things like emotion. Kozlov's research is representative of current Soviet efforts to explain paranormal phenomena on the basis of known physical and biological parameters. Another Soviet scientist, Pressman, feels that biological energy and information exchange between living organisms is the result of electromagnetic field interactions between individuals or between the individual and the environment. He and other Soviet scientists have recorded electromagnetic frequencies from man, frogs, insects of various species at ranges from several centimeters to several meters from the body's surface. The frequencies of the electromagnetic fields were found to correspond to various biorhythms of organs, rhythms of movement and acoustic signals, and bioelectric rhythms. Pressman thinks that in groups of animals, electromagnetic oscillations are synchronized by frequency matching, and that the cumulative intensity may grow in proportion to the square of the number of individuals. What does that mean? Do you remember hearing the stories about when everybody watches the Super Bowl, they can literally measure the energy change in the earth? Or when 9/11 happened, they could literally measure the energy change in the earth? That is what this is saying. Pressman thinks that in groups of animals, electromagnetic oscillations are synchronized by frequency matching, and that the cumulative intensity may grow in proportion to the square of the number of individuals. This makes me think of why females synchronize their cycles when they live together. Things that make you go, Such cumulative emissions is also thought to be possible as a result of synchronization of the emissions of many cells in animals in a highly excited state. We're going to pause right here, and I'm going to show you a study, right? Because what we just read was this idea of being able to measure the electromagnetic signals, the oscillations coming off of man, frogs, and insects in ranges from several centimeters to several meters from the body surface. And so what we're going to see here, spontaneous radio frequency emissions from electron spins within the Drosophila, that is a fruit fly, a preliminary report on a novel biological signal, and this is dated July of 2019. Electron spins. Using simple radio frequency instrumentation, we detect spontaneous radio frequency emissions from the Drosophila, a fruit fly, or many fruit flies in this case, immersed in a magnetic field within a waveguide or a shielded RF resonator. So this is just a chamber in a lab that they made, that they then put a waveguide next to, and then they immerse this whole thing in a magnetic field and then measure the electromagnetic signals through that waveguide. So they created a controlled, isolated environment and used loop coils, loop antennas, which are the same thing they use in watches, the same thing they use in headphones, the same thing they use in laptops and cell phones, right? It's a loop antenna, a coil as an antenna. They use that to generate the field. Here we go. Remarkably, the RF emissions were abolished by chloroform anesthesia, suggesting that they come from the nervous system of a fruit fly. So they were picking up radio frequency energy, and when they put chloroform in the chamber and put these fruit flies to sleep, the electromagnetic energy went away. RF frequency and magnetic field dependence are consistent with RF emissions being related to electron Zeeman energy. Since the RF emissions occur without external energy input, its energy must come from cell metabolism, which is what we were just reading that they were looking at back in the 60s and the 70s. We propose that RF emissions are due to in vivo spin polarized cellular electron currents in the body, spin polarized electron currents. Spin polarized electron currents. So when you look at how elements are formed, you have those shells, the protons and the neutrons in the middle and the nucleus, and you got those electrons spinning around on the outside. Spin polarized cellular electron currents. Furthermore, when you look at this statement or these words here, you can also kind of envision what quantum mechanics looks like when you have spin polarized specific states in the quantum mechanical fields, and that they are spin polarized, and you're able to measure the orientation, upspin or a downspin or otherwise, only upon measurement of these things. So there is, in my view, a direct correlation with this whole idea of bioenergy and quantum mechanics. And so I don't think it's any accident that the United States at this point is pouring $2 billion with a B dollars into quantum sciences, with the Department of Energy as the central mechanism, the central hub. This is just civilian applications of quantum, right? Quantum research over the next 10 years, $2 billion. We suggest that spin polarized currents relax radiatively to equilibrium at the Lamour frequency and are detected under our experimental conditions. So let's go down to, we're not going to read all of this, although it's a very interesting read. They tell you how they set this thing up. Look, there's this little chamber here. There's the waveguide. There's the coil. There's ferrite. We've looked at ferrite, right? There's things that ferrite does when it's around a coil that starts creating very, very specific types of field generations. And then you've got this box here that's got the flies in it. And here's a coupling coil, right? And you see this. This is how this whole thing is made. Electromagnetic pole. It's a cool little setup, what they made. Results. Signals were not always present in every batch of live flies. In the waveguide experiments, if the end plate was properly adjusted onto the waveguide flange, excellent radio quiet was obtained. Monitored on an oscilloscope displaying the output of the logarithmic power meter, and there was no visible artifacts with outside sources. So what they're getting at here is that human error impacted the measurement sensitivity of what they're trying to read, which is the nervous system of fruit flies, the electromagnetic radiation that's emitted from the nervous system of fruit flies, and that the measurement requirements in this lab experiment were so sensitive that the way in which they set up the equipment impacted their ability to read. And that's what they're saying here. They just come right out in the front and say it. They weren't always present in every batch of live fruit flies. And it says that if the end plate was properly adjusted onto the waveguide flange, excellent radio quiet was obtained. That's what they're saying. And here's just basically a graph. So here's the empty tube is in black. And when they had everything set up properly and they had very, very, very good constants in their experiment, when everything was set the way it was supposed to be, the way it was intended to be, right, where they could read what's going on, then you see this graph in red. Radio frequency emissions from an average, right, 10 fruit flies contained in a Teflon tube positioned at the end of a waveguide, detected at 4.5 to 4.8 gigahertz with room temperature, C-band satellite receiver, right, with a room temperature C-band satellite receiver. That's the 4.5 to 4.8 gigahertz. Just how sensitive does the military get when they have this kind of stuff up in space? How sensitive can it be? Just saying. The value of the steady magnetic field is given in the abacus, I don't know, emitted RF power in the ordinate. The signal is detected using logarithmic power meter and a lock-in amplifier with a modulation frequency of 16 kilohertz. A steady magnetic field is ramped at approximately 10 Gauss per second, which is just a measurement of the magnetic flux. The trace is exponentiated to restore linearity. It clearly shows several resonant features at 200, 270, 770, 800, 1050, and 1300 Gauss. So these are the spikes that you're seeing in the red, or those numbers. The red traces show the signal when the live flies are present in the tube. The black trace is taken a few minutes earlier with no flies in the tube and has the properties of Gaussian noise. The empty tube trace has been shifted downwards in the main graph. So what you see here are similarities, right? You can see, like right here, for example, you've got ups and downs. Even though they're not really right next to each other, you kind of see the same general shapings in some of these situations. But what they're getting at here, what they're showing you on the graph is this is what the baseline is with the experiment. And when they ramp up the magnetic field and no flies are in there, that's the black line. When the flies are present, they measure this type of a change. And they're saying that this is the electromagnetic emissions out of the nervous system of a fly. So this is a 2019 published study. Let's go back to the 1970s. Pressman, like Kodlov, feels the effects of subthreshold stimuli are mediated through the hypothalamic region of the midbrain. The hypothalamus regulates diverse physiological processes in the organism: pulse, body temperature, oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide liberation, urine volume, urine nitrogen concentration, etc. And these are functions most commonly disturbed by changes in electromagnetic frequency. Pressman believes that electromagnetic signaling is universal between animals, but not between humans who may have lost the capability for such communication as a result of evolution and the development of verbal and artificial communication channels. Now, that is an interesting type of phenomenon. Let's get biblical here real quick, because what just came to mind for me is the story of the Tower of Babel, right? We're trying to like build a stairway to heaven. I think that's the story. Don't quote me if I know there's a stairway to heaven story in the Bible, right? And God saw what was happening, and everybody spoke the same language at that point. And so his solution was to change everybody's language. And I'm just wondering if this is what this guy was kind of getting at. Pressman, scientist, believes that electromagnetic signaling is universal between animals, but not between humans, who may have lost this capability because other communication evolved. such as the development of verbal and artificial communication channels. He does not rule out the possibility that spontaneous telepathy may occasionally occur, but regards such occurrences as rare cases of atavism. Consequently, he regards man as the least suitable animal for studying electromagnetic communication. It is important that the increased degree of sophistication which has occurred in Soviet ESP or telepathy research since 1960 be understood. At present, the term ESP and telepathy are seldom used. It is possible that the newer terms biocommunication and psychotronics will vanish in the near future, only to be replaced by conventional high-energy physics terminology or terms such as interpersonal subconscious reactions or ment-ion forces. In any event, the classical extrasensory perception experiments with animals are no longer of interest in the USSR. The typical Vassiliev experimentation from 1920 to 1955 has been replaced with sophisticated research protocols which study complex interaction between man, animals, and plants. Dr. Pavel Naumov, who bears no relation to the now imprisoned Edward Naumov, conducted animal biocommunication studies between submerged Soviet Navy submarine and a shore research station. This is insane. Listen to this. The tests involved a mother rabbit and her newborn litter and occurred around 1956. So Mama Rabbit has babies, right? 3 years prior to the USS Nautilus disclosure, which is a different thing that we'll read about in a minute. So mama rabbit, baby rabbit. According to Naumov, Soviet scientists placed baby rabbits aboard the submarine. They kept the mother rabbit in a laboratory on shore where they implanted electrodes in her brain. When the submarine was submerged, assisted ants, so they used ants, right, to kill the baby rabbits one by one. At each precise moment of death, the mother rabbit's brain produced detectable and recordable reactions. Do you want me to break? I'll break that down. Mama has baby rabbits. Scientists take baby rabbits and put them on a submarine. Mama's in a laboratory on shore. Mama gets a surgery and she gets electrodes put in her brain so they can measure the electrical activity in the mama rabbit's brain. Then the babies, one by one, are murdered. They are eaten alive by ants. And on the moment of their death, the mama rabbit has measurable response in her brain that they're able to measure with the electrodes that they implanted in her brain. And baby rabbits were in a submarine under the ocean, while mama rabbit was in a cage in a laboratory. As late as 1970, the precise protocol and results of this test described by Naumov were believed to be classified. Many examples can be found in Soviet literature dealing with dogs, bears, birds, insects, and fish, in conjunction with basic psychotronic research. The Pavlov Institute in Moscow may have been involved in animal telepathy until 1970. And we're scrolling. It pauses at the end of each page, so it takes a minute to, there we go. Telepathy, energy transfer in man. Classical theories and experiments. Over the past 25 years, Soviet scientists have reported that abilities such as extrasensory perception, clairvoyance, and telepathy have been demonstrated in the laboratory under rigorously controlled conditions. Many of these claims have been published in the Soviet technical and popular literature. Just how far the Soviets have really gone in their efforts to learn about the mechanisms of human telepathy is not known. If the Soviet reports are even partly true, if the Soviet reports are even partly true, and if mind-to-mind thought transference can be used for such applications as interplanetary communications or the guiding of interplanetary spacecraft, the Soviets have accomplished a scientific breakthrough of tremendous Significance. For many years, any attempt to study telepathic phenomena was denounced in the Soviet Union as mysticism and idealism. From 1922 to 1959, however, this attitude gradually changed. Official recognition of parapsychology as a legitimate science was prompted to a considerable extent by the party's recognition of other disciplines which had previously been rejected as bourgeois idealism, things like quantum mechanics, the theory of relativity, and cybernetics. In 1959, Professor Vasiliev published his Mysterious Phenomena of the Human Psyche, followed in 1962 by his Experiments in Mental Suggestion. These two publications caused some surprise among Western scientists, but the possible military implications were apparently overlooked in the West. The first attempt to illustrate the possible military and intelligence impact of Soviet research in telepathy and psychokinesis was published in 1972. The publication of Vasiliev's first book in 1959 was followed by the appearance of countless studies of other Soviet researchers and numerous articles in the Soviet periodical press. Soviet parapsychology research gained impetus and sophistication, growing from a single laboratory into a coordinated USSR-wide effort. Laboratories were also established in Czechoslovakia. Funds for research, reportedly at 20 million rubles in 1973, are believed to be primarily from military sources. This high level of support advanced Soviet research on human telepathy far beyond that of the West, and the USSR became the leader in sponsoring and participating in international parapsychology symposiums. Such international meetings have served Soviet interests by allowing them to benefit from Western research. After 1959, large numbers of Soviet scientists began investigating telepathic communication. In 1965, a bioinformation department was formed at the Moscow section of the Scientific Technical Society of Radio Engineering and Telecommunications, this guy Popov, with the purpose of furthering scientific research on information transmission in the living part of nature. Furthering scientific research on information transmission, right? In the living part of nature. The early Soviet objectives, which were made public, were to study and organize relevant materials from the world literature, to record and systematize observed occurrences of spontaneous telepathy, and to develop and organize experiments on artificially initiated telepathic occurrences. At a meeting of the Bionics Department of the Presidium of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR in 1965, Kogan raised the following three questions. Is telepathy possible in principle? Does it contradict natural laws? And finally, do the observed facts agree with the concept of electromagnetic fields? To answer these questions, the following hypotheses have been advanced in the USSR. The electromagnetic hypothesis, 1892. Advanced as a result of the discovery of the electromagnetic wave in 1888. By the mid-1960s, this hypothesis has been subjected to considerable criticism. The entire range of the electromagnetic spectrum, from gamma rays to radio waves, had been studied. Throughout this range, there was not a single sector in which telepathic communication could be established. Experiments with reliable forms of metallic shielding had not prevented this recipient from receiving messages transmitted to him, also verified in the West. Moreover, effectiveness of signals transmitted over hundreds or thousands of kilometers should, according to the theory, diminish in proportion to the square of the distance. This has never been established in relevant experimentation. The electromagnetic hypothesis has not been rejected, and some evidence indicates that there may be electromagnetic waves of some unknown length emitted by the brain, which are capable of penetrating metallic obstacles. The meta-ethereal hypothesis, borrowed from French parapsychology. This presupposes the existence of some unknown meta-ethereal energy, the oscillations of which can be detected only by special organs of crypto-aesthetic sensitivity possessed by persons endowed with parapsychic abilities. The psychic energy hypothesis. According to this theory, bioelectrical charges in the working brain of the inductor are transformed into psychic energy, which is transformed back again into bioelectric charges in the receiving brain of the percipient. And Vassiliev proposed gravitational hypothesis, first formulated by the German physicist Pascual Jordan and Einstein's former collaborator, Dr. Hoffman. Vassiliev suggested that an interaction between the gravitational field and some existing but unexplained factor, possibly produced by the cerebral matter itself, might be involved in telepathic communication. He also suggested that thought transmissions might be connected with the laws of cybernetic systems. Vassiliev also referred to the action of neutrino particles formed during nuclear reactions. If it could be established that such particles, which have no electric charge, move with the speed approaching that of light and are capable of penetrating obstacles of enormous mass, they're generated during the neuropsychic activity of the brain, it might be conceivably shown that these particles serve as the medium for telepathic transmissions. The Soviets' renewed interest in the problem of parapsychology during the 1960s constituted to a certain extent another aspect of the trend away from doctrinaire control, which had previously dominated all areas of intellectual efforts in the USSR. The easing of intellectual control was exemplified by a quote from Laplace's Essai philosophique sur les probabilités, used by Professor Vassiliev. We are so far from knowing all the forces of nature and their various modes of action that it would be unworthy of the philosopher to deny phenomena simply because they are inexplicable at the present state of our knowledge. The more difficult it is to acknowledge their existence, the greater the care with which we must study these phenomena. Vassiliev himself said, "It has opened more than once in the history of science the establishment of new facts that were unexplainable by what was already known, gave us a glimpse of unforeseen aspects of existence." Such was the climate of Soviet parapsychological research in the early 1970s. Soviet science, for all its characteristic pragmatism, had apparently begun to free itself gradually from the restraints of an outworn materialistic foundation, which on more than one occasion had shown its flimsy bases when faced with new discoveries. However, as noted in Section 1, there may now once again be fairly concerted effort on the part of some highly placed Soviet scientists in other disciplines to undermine parapsychology on political, ideological grounds. In 1966, Zeigel had a renowned Soviet astronomer concluded that telepathy is the science of the future. In order for it to become a service to mankind, research in telepathy must be organized on a statewide basis. Otherwise, after a short while, reproaching ourselves for past mistakes, we again would have to catch up with foreign countries. If the insulting remarks addressed to scientists engaged in telepathic studies were made privately, they could simply be ignored. Such criticisms, however, are aired publicly in the press by people of incontestable authority in other fields. What happened to genetics and cybernetics is now being repeated again and again. One can no longer remain silent, but must take the full responsibility of stating that criticism of telepathy is tantamount to militant obscurantism. Zeigel's words did not go unheeded because by 1968, the Soviets already had established several research centers specializing in telepathic experiments on an academic and scientific level, organized teams of scientists, physiologists, physicists, psychologists, mathematicians, cyberneticians, neurologists, and electronic engineers to investigate telepathy, find out how it works, and devise means of a practical application, and conducted experiments involving long-range thought transference from Leningrad to Moscow, 600 kilometers, and Moscow to Tomsk, 4,000 kilometers. Without actually taking an unequivocal stand on the controversial issues of telepathy, Parmov in 1966 cited at least three paradoxes. Telepathic communication is independent of distance. Telepathic communication is achieved without the use of the known senses and has no apparent relation to electromagnetic waves. Some cases of spontaneous telepathy and clairvoyance contradict the law of causality, that's cause and effect. It should be mentioned that if Parmov had stated his third paradox a few years sooner, it would have meant certain scientific and intellectual exile. However, Parmov attempted to ascertain the extent to which these paradoxes might fit into fundamental laws of natural science, and thereby remain somewhat within the bounds of traditional dogmatic, materialistic principles. Parmov felt that the first paradox might be resolved if the material carrier of the telepathic effect is some type of energy unlikely to dissipate in space, or all people are linked together by a special telepathic field. In the first case, the material carrier could be conceivably by the neutrino, which, at least within the Earth's biosphere, is not absorbed by matter. In the second case, it might be surmised that in addition to the inductor and percipient, telepathic phenomena involve an unspecified number of people for amplification of the telepathic signal, just as a photomultiplier amplifies light. A similar explanation was applied to the second paradox. The neutrino hypothesis, however, had its drawbacks. It is not quite clear, for instance, which type of neutrino is responsible for the transmission of telepathic signals. It is possible that all people are interlinked by a neutrino field, and this would support the amplification theory. The third paradox is the least palatable to traditional scientists and the most susceptible to criticism by opponents of telepathy. Its explanation requires, by implication, the breakdown of well-established concepts regarding time and space. One of the ideas advanced by some theoreticians is that of a closed time, in which such notions as past and future become relative even beyond the theory of relativity. By accepting such an idea, it must be assumed as a matter of fact that the human brain can somehow locate the future by means of the neutrino. Parmov observed that other theoreticians had hypothesized that the neutrino's peculiar behavior is due to the fact that this particle moves from the future into the past rather than the other way around. Such a concept would do justice to the third paradox. It is interesting to note that these paradoxes were expressed before theoreticians began extensive discussions on tachyons, particles said to have velocity greater than the speed of light. Mental ions, having similar velocities of propagation, have also been postulated. These are discussed further in part B of this section. So we're going to stop. We have a few minutes left, and I really just want to re-emphasize to you that what we're reading is a series of documents of many different scientists, particularly in the Soviet Union, USSR area, and their approaches to trying to understand biologic energy, most specifically telepathy, so that it's useful and meaningful. And so when we read these documents, you're going to see a back and forth as it relates to what they say is possible, what they say is not possible, what works, what doesn't work, what the theories are. And I just want to remind you that it's important. It's important to think about this for yourself, whether or not you come to any conclusions. This is more or less intended to share with you just how much energy, not just money, but energy, people spending their entire lives working on these ideas. And how and what does this mean to our species as we move forward in time? Because we are at the time where technology, material science, communications, miniaturization, all the way down to nanotech, quantum mechanics, quantum science, all of these fields, all of these different things are fusing together and creating synergies that are going to manifest a world. They're going to manifest a society that looks radically different. It's going to be equivalent to the discovery of fire or the wheel or the telephone or the computer. That's where we're at in our evolution right now. And you can argue either side of the coin about most of those technologies being beneficial or detrimental, because there are benefits and drawbacks to both. This is no different. We literally are on the precipice of a giant evolution. We are engaged or participating in a revolution of our evolution, because we are battling over how these technologies are going to be deployed. A revolution in our evolution, folks.